Welcome back to the Dropping in Surf Show. My name is Rob Case, paddling technique coach. This episode was recorded on October 28th, 2020. I'm joined by my co-host and doctor of physical therapy, Jim Segelnik. And we had a great conversation with Gold Coast, Australia-based doctor of physiotherapy, Scott Johnstone. Scott is a senior physiotherapist with a strong background in sports and musculoskeletal rehabilitation. His experience has seen him work with local rugby teams, professional surfers, U.S. water polo team. He's been involved in a research capacity at the Surfing Australia High Performance Center, has published research in the area of musculoskeletal shoulder assessment. He's also a published writer with Surfing Life magazine and spends a month each year working at Hidden Bay Resort in the Mentawai Islands. Scott's been through some injury himself, having shoulder surgery and also overcoming a pretty serious low back injury. He's a big advocate of using an individual approach to each person and each injury. He's developed a unique approach to treatment by combining the latest science, hands-on technique exercises, and mindset training to get the best outcomes for each patient. I would describe Scott as a caring, very concise physio. He has a great sense of humor, yet also very professional. Hope you enjoy our conversation with Scott Johnstone, Doctor of Physiotherapy. I'm digging the beard.
Yeah, man. This is the COVID, the ramifications of COVID.
It's a good looking beard, bro.
Thanks, man. I'd tried separately when I was, probably 5 or 6 years ago, and it was pretty patchy and wasn't really filled in. So I'd kind of given up hope for a few years, and then just got a bit lazy with shaving, and it started to look okay. So I just kept it going.
Nice.
How do you keep a beard like that as a physio? No one says anything?
Nah, man. I guess it kind of helps. I work for myself, so
That's it. Or maybe it's an Aussie thing. I don't know.
I think the clinic I work in is pretty casual as well. I basically am working out of a more of a gym sort of setting. So we've got it's a kind of surf movement training gym. So we're all kind of barefoot and kind of wearing boardies and t-shirts. So it's pretty chill. So I think it kind of fits that all okay.
Dude, so you see mine?
Yeah, man.
So I got out of the clinic like an hour ago, and people give me a hard time for that.
Okay.
They're like, hey Jim, you're kind of, what's up, man? You still got a roof over your head, or
Bit slack today kind of thing.
yeah? But
Interesting. I think we keep it pretty chill here. People don't seem to care too much about beards these days.
I think it's less the people and more the professionals. Yeah, behind the scene. Yeah. Yeah. It looks like you've created a really cool thing out there, man.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's been pretty interesting kind of experience setting the whole thing up and kind of just the way it's gone. It's sort of one of those things. I wasn't too sure when I was kind of leaving my other work and getting set up what the how well it would end up.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of had some. So I worked in a big kind of physio practice. Kind of 5-6 physios, remedial massage, Pilates, the whole sort of thing. So I was there for about 6 years, and then kind of set up. I'd kind of connected with Rodrigo, who owns Holistic Pro Health.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd done some courses with him and a couple of bits and pieces along the lines of some movement training, and was just trying to kind of like find a bit of a different way of understanding the body, and Rod's bit of a guru in that aspect. So basically he was looking for a physio to come on board and kind of set up out of the clinic. So kind of we have a few like independent businesses all operating under the same flag to a degree.
Cool. So are you the only physio in that clinic? Or in that
Exactly,
space?
man. Yeah.
And what is Rod? Is he a trainer?
Yeah, so Rod's got an interesting background. He's from Brazil, but he's lived in Aussie for probably over 20 years. But his background was exercise science, and then sort of moved over to Australia, and so he'd sort of done his study in Brazil, and then just one of those guys. I think he's just studied, lots of different topics under lots of different kind of people, and put together like a bit of a system based on all of that.
Actually, when we met, Scott was the one that taught me the difference between a PT and a physio in Australia. I didn't know what the difference was. I kept calling everyone PTs, and like, oh, you know what? I'm not a PT, I'm a physio, bro.
Yeah, they're like a little bit offended, a little bit like.
A PT in Australia is a personal trainer, is that?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So we get called PTs here.
Yeah, I know. It's a funny it's a funny one. And what are you guys, physical therapists as well?
Yeah, PTs, physical therapists. Some people kind of get on their soapbox and call themselves DPTs, which is like, I'm sure it's the same thing there. It just means doctor of physical therapy.
Yeah, it's a funny area. The program that I studied through was actually a DPT as well.
Okay.
So a bit of a funny one, because it was sort of it was at Bond University, so it was sort of the first one in Australia to start calling the program the DPT.
And that was what, 9 years ago or something, or?
Yeah, probably slightly less than that. I finished 6. So yeah, no, you're probably right. It's probably 7 to 9.
Somewhere in there.
Yeah. So there's a bit of like in that program that we did a few extra kind of research elements, and had to like a big project, which a lot of the other courses didn't do. So in that sense, that was what kind of call it the DPT. But yeah, I just view it as a kind of coursework masters essentially. What
research did you do?
So actually, I was pretty lucky there, and kind of semi-relevant for what we're talking about. I was linked up with a guy, James Finesse, who was kind of my mentor through the research, and basically we combined our research. So he was doing his PhD on kind of surfing related injuries. So the first leg of his was to put out a big questionnaire to, I believe it was over sort of 1,500 surfers, just to identify the common injury patterns. And then the part that I was involved in, we actually did some screening, some like musculoskeletal screening on kind of some elite surfers and recreational. So that was his part of the PhD that I was helping. And then the part that we did specifically together, we were looking at testing shoulder range of movement, specifically sort of internal and external rotation in a supine versus a prone position, just to see if there was any. It was like a reliability study to see the reliability of testing in that sort of sport specific position.
Mm-hmm. Anything good? Anything interesting come out of that you can remember?
Yeah, bits and pieces. With the shoulder stuff, I guess the main conclusion was that it was reliable to test in prone for shoulder internal and external rotation. That other kind of interesting parts, probably more in the stuff that James identified with some of the questionnaire type stuff with the surfers. So some common kind of sites of injury and rates of injury. And one interesting thing was the guys doing airs. That was like a big kind of differentiator in terms of lower limb ankle injuries.
More ankles, yeah.
More ankles with people doing airs, which kind of makes sense, but good to kind of have that kind of laid out there. But yeah, just sort of the two, you got more of the acute sort of injuries, lots of like lacerations, and that seems to show up pretty highly. And then more the kind of repeated load injuries like shoulders and lumbar spine, lower backs. So yeah, kind of we got the sort of more acute, the acute mechanisms, the knees, the ankles, the cuts, those sorts of things. And then we've got the more load related injuries that might take a few thousand paddles to show up, or Yeah, might show up on the 5th or the 6th day of your surf trip, but not the 1st or the 2nd.
Yeah. I got a question for the two of you guys with injuries. Between those categories where you got load versus like an abrupt trauma, which of the two do you think, once something goes, which of the two takes longer to recover from?
Oh, man. Scott, you want to take this one, bud?
Yeah, I can answer that pretty well. So, yeah, look, obviously, it's going to depend a fair bit on the.
It depends.
Oh,
it's a classic.
It's a PT global answer.
Oh, excuse me, classic physio answer. No disrespect. No disrespect.
I've listened to a lot of McGill, so.
Oh yeah.
Probably a bit of that coming through.
Pretty much every good physio says it depends. You know that, right?
Yeah, it's hard to put a kind of concrete thing on something that's so. Every injury and every rehab is very like individual specific and very context specific.
Yeah.
So this is where it's always tricky, but I think generally, acute injuries for me and a lot of the athletes and things, I find them a bit easier in the sense that you've got an obvious kind of starting point and then generally a pretty fairly linear progression with the recovery. There's some bumps in the road, but
I agree.
Generally, it's
more predictable.
1 week we're here, next week we're there.
Right.
There's a pattern of tissue healing, and if we follow that along, then the rehab matches the sort of tissue healing versus the more chronic and kind of longer duration type stuff. So usually there's some more subtleties in terms of the development and the mechanism. And then that's when we've got to factor in the other elements. I know, Jim, you're kind of pretty big on the sort of biopsychosocial, and I talk about that a lot with clients as well, and factoring their whole kind of person, sleep, nutrition, recovery, hydration, mindset, work stresses, all those things start to then play a role in the surfer with back pain. So
yeah, I think maybe fortunately I've converted Rob. He's the most biopsychosocial paddle coach of all time now.
I'm the only paddle coach.
He's the only paddle coach that understands the BPS model, which might be a side effect of hanging out with me too long. But Scott, to answer that, I'll take the easy way out and say I kind of parallel Scott's answer. Traumatic things, especially post-surgical, follow a pretty predictable pattern. And then more non-traumatic or chronic things kind of can go up and down and can be very subjectively erratic day to day or week to week. Like what I hear a lot, Scott, is, hey, I'm worse this week. I don't know why. Right? And you're like, well, 2 weeks ago you were steadily getting better. And sometimes pinning that on a certain thing is very hard to do. Like maybe the past 2 weeks they weren't sleeping as well, or maybe they over-volumed on their training and didn't realize it, or maybe they drank too much coffee in the morning. Really, I tend to tell people it's kind of like the stock market that goes up and down, and all we're looking for is a general trend line. Like if I called my stock guy every day and I was like, dude, the stock market's down, he would say, please stop calling me. He'd say it's long-term investing. And, Scott, like I think that whole biopsychosocial stuff, I think does get a lot of play. But I tend to remind myself that it's sometimes it's in the tissues too. Like there are things that I believe are 90+% biomedical or biomechanical. They just take a shit long time to get better, and having patience is key. And if people don't hear that, then they're quicker to go get injections or surgeries when no one told them, hey, that like osteitis pubis thing, or that proximal adductor tendon, or the proximal hamstring tendon thing that can take on average 6 to 12 months just to get better. Like pump the brakes at 3 months if you're not better. Just like nurture it and see where it goes and allow some up and downs. So and maybe some of that coaching is a bit more psychological, but the timeline, if you want to call it that, is more physiological. It's just we've become privy to how long some things take, you know?
Nice, man. Yeah, that's a yeah. I think we would probably treat along a pretty similar approach there. And yeah, I think you just need to know what the tissue injury is. You know, let's say a disc, for example, is, I see a lot of back pain, and you know, that can be a testing one for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there's sort of some debate. You know, is it a chronic back pain? Is it chronic, or is it repeated acute pain? Because the injury mechanism, which I believe is going to stem a lot to people's movement patterns and the way of loading the spine, you know, which is going to come down to kind of hip mobility, breathing strategy, you know, the entire structure,
Mm-hmm.
and how we're loading that entire structure. And you know, if we can get someone moving a bit better, so that instead of let's say flexing the spine, you know, multiple times a day, if that was a spine that didn't tolerate that position or mechanism, if we can teach someone a bit of a better hip hinge, you know, then that tissue injury has a chance to start to settle down. So yeah, I've had some really nice outcomes with some people that wouldn't have gone very as well with the biopsychosocial approach. It's always there, and you're always delivering it with your communication. But yeah, I agree. I treat the biomechanics a lot. And I tend to find the more efficient we get people's movement, the more we improve their loading strategy. And then even a lot of those long-term injuries do have a good chance to settle down, because we're not kind of picking the scab, so to speak. I kind of use analogy, a lot of back pain, you know, it's the kind of death by 1,000 cuts. And a lot of times the sad thing is we don't really know those things we're doing that are creating those loading patterns.
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of my take.
I have another
on
question
a few of those things.
I have another question for the two of you guys. You were talking about being able to see the person's activity and that possibly being a root cause of some sort. So with the surfers, I know Jim treats a lot of the guys that we surf with. I don't know how often you're coming across people that you surf with as well. Do you guys see an advantage of you being able to see their movement signature while they're surfing, and then being able to treat them, and either saying, hey, you know what, it has nothing to do with your movement in surfing, which means that it's going to have to do with something outside of what you're doing within surfing, or you can pinpoint and say, yeah, it's definitely the way that you're moving when you're popping up, or when you're paddling, or when you're riding a wave and twisting. Do you see an advantage there, and do you have that experience? Why don't we start with Scott?
Cool, man. Yeah, so I think that's a good question, and I guess I almost don't differentiate how we move on the land to how we move on the water. So I sort of think if the way someone's going to move on a wave is generally a reflection of how they're going to move on land. So let's say someone's hip flexion, you know, they aren't able to bring the hip straight through without say having a compensatory flexion in the lumbar spine, and they don't have the capacity or the ability to get that position on the land. Well, then the way they're going to do that same movement pattern in the water is going to be similar. So I think we can address as a physio, you know, I think I'm a good physio and a good kind of understander of movement, but I'm also not a surf coach. You know, I came into surfing late, so I've studied a lot of the movements of surfing and talk with a lot of surf coaches that kind of specialize in the movements of surfing, and connecting with people like you, Rob, that understand the kind of subtle aspects of the skill of the different parts of surfing. And so, yeah, I kind of see my role as preparing the person with their rehabilitation and with their land-based training to give them the option to access the positions they need in the water, and to have the potential to kind of get where they need to get in their surfing. And then I like to work with coaches. I've got a surf coach that I work with, and a few people like that I think are probably better positioned to work on those subtle details with people surfing. But I can kind of clear someone, okay, we know you've got full shoulder range, so that shouldn't be the limiting factor to your paddling. Or we know you've built up good capacity in your rotator cuff, so we now know that shouldn't be as much of a barrier to you having a longer surf, let's say.
Who's the surf coach you use, Scott?
So I got a friend, his name's Mark Richo. So Richo is a really good surfer himself. He's like a 5-time Aussie champion, was a kind of long-term pro surfer himself, and works with a lot of junior surfers and a few kind of CT level surfers. And I think most good surfers that have come through the Gold Coast have worked with Richo at kind of one point or another.
Cool. Yeah,
so, yeah, it's fun. I've been doing some. I guess I connected a bit with Richo as well because of wanting to sort of progress my own surfing and coming into surfing like as a sort of adult learner. Let's call it that. I sort of self-taught myself at about age 22, 23, and so there's a lot of fumbling along and a lot of bad habits and a lot of I think you plateau. You get to an okay point. And then without getting that kind of coach's eye involved, you're just going to keep fumbling along at that similar level. So yeah, it's been awesome that's how I connected with Richo, was to work on my own surfing. Then he had a few injuries and Richo's son, Ty, is a really amazing surfer. So I sponsor Ty as well, with Sapien and sort of look after his training and kind of development as an athlete. So then it's nice, we can, we sort of know then when kind of upcoming contest that Ty's got, the amount they're surfing. I sort of know what they're doing in the clinic and yeah, so it's a cool little feedback loop when you've got the kind of different professions and different skill sets all lining up together.
Yeah.
Jim, what about you? Do you see cues from people in the water that you would then notice in the clinic?
Yes and no. I mean, you've heard me kind of talk a lot about within normal limits variances of gait and scapular dyskinesia and whether or not these things predispose us to pain or not, and how some of that might be debatable. But I definitely concur with Scott's sentiment. But I think Scott, what are your thoughts on this? It's pretty easy to see when people are in pain surfing. They'll like subtle things. Like I saw a guy the other day that was kind of like doing this, just sitting there. It's like, okay, like what's going on? There's nothing that I could see. Maybe Rob could with his paddle technique that might say he's contributing, but he tipped me off with just more of like a behavioral cue that, scratching his shoulder. He keeps like trying to massage it. So, little things like that, I'm really observant with. But, a common one that I see, Rob and I had a mutual client recently. He had a common problem that I think I see quite a bit in maybe the, 30, 40, 50 plus year old surfer, where he was talking about his back pinching when he transitions from being on board paddling to popping up. It's that like quick lordotic extended position, go into a quick flexion, and he goes, my back hurts and my feet end up too close together, and it's just then the waves are running off, and so I think I'm very like Maitland trained, Scott.
Nice.
And so Rob,
similar in Australia, a lot of Maitland is still the kind of main let's say religion, so to speak.
Philosophy or
philosophy.
Yeah. So Rob,
in the unis here.
Yeah. Jeffrey Maitland was an old Australian physio that kind of paved the way for people like me. It was almost like a blueprint way of thinking and treating with like a hands-on based exam and treatment. And so I think for a lot of those things, I'm very like Maitland minded, where it's just like, just keep it simple, treat the thing that hurts, add in more systems as you go, which is where I see movement quality. So like I kind of drew this. I don't know if you guys can see this. Can you see that? So this is so it's like an hourglass for people that are listening. and the top is like a funnel, and that's like all the stuff. That's what people say, like, oh, it hurts, my back pinches when I go from prone to popping up. And let's say, okay, it's like an L4-5 disc or joint. That's the treatment. We're just doing something to L4-5. Maybe that's day one. And as time goes on, we're adding more and more adjacent contributing factor things, more systems. So once we're convinced it's L4-5 or whatever it is, they're getting a little bit better. Now we add in some hip mobility. Now we add in some hip hinging. Now we add in some core work. Now we add in some thoracic spine stuff. And it just kind of goes like that. I think that's kind of how my thought is with surfing. Is, okay, if you have pain that's disrupting your experience, like, I'm quick to just go, let's just get the pain better. And if that's modifying your activity or doing something indirect or direct, usually I'm a fan of going direct because I'm Maitland trained. Unless they're so acute, we need to do something indirect. And then I kind of build from there. And so what I mean by indirect, Rob, is if this gets here and this is L4-5 and they're so hot or acute, we might do something to their thoracic spine and then come back to this model and then bridge outward. So indirect is treating not the tissue directly, but doing something to calm pain down to the point where it becomes more of what Maitland would call a mechanical presentation, and then you can kind of bridge outward from there. So I don't think that's necessarily right or wrong. Like, you could definitely go into kind of like a functional movement screen first, and then I know a lot of people do that, and that's good. But that's kind of my, I guess you could say, my physio DNA. That's kind of how I think with things that are bothering people.
Nice. Yeah, I think pain is like, most people really, they present to a clinic for pain. Mm-hmm. That's the reason they're paying us. Right. That's the reason they're seeing us.
Right.
So it's, there's a lot of, you see floating around on the internet, a lot of the sort of pain science and a lot of the kind of bagging of treatment modalities that are geared towards improving pain, let's say, at the very least. But yeah, I agree with you there. Like, if you can take someone from having quite a tricky experience with pain, and you can have a quick change in that, then even mentally, I think that's a big big box ticked for the person that's paying you, for your knowledge. So yeah, I like to kind of do the same there. Have a try and get an understanding about what is actually going on. And I think sometimes people get there's a lot of different treatment options out there. And, you might see someone and they'll say, oh, I've been seeing my chiro, my osteo, my PT, my physio, I've been seeing them. And they're like, okay, so do you know what's actually going on? What's actually wrong with you? Mm-hmm. And they're like, oh, they actually don't even know, but they've done, half a dozen treatment sessions, and no one's ever explained to them what the likely injury is and what the progression of that should be. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think trying to give people that pathway is really helpful. And sometimes it starts with that. Let's just calm down. Let's get rid of the pain, because the pain is going to influence your movement. It's going to influence your mood. It's going to influence your sleep. So if we can do some things in the short term to kind of dampen that experience, and then build the capacity on the back of that. Yeah. So I think I agree, pretty much exactly what you're saying, Jim.
Yeah, that's good stuff, man. I like how you say that. And I have a similar kind of experience. People are just people, no matter where they're located in the world. It's like, for whatever reason, maybe the culture's shifting a little bit, but I'm very used to 5+ years ago, people with persistent pain, they've done everything first except therapy. Right? It's like, okay, well, what have you done? I've done chiro, massage, acupuncture. I did Reiki. I did a personal training session. I'm like, how is it that we're like in this modern day world and this person is like looking at all these other things versus like the most potentially scientific way of treating their pain? Like that that's intriguing to me. And part of it could be just the culture, the way we are presented from doctors. Maybe we're underlooked or overlooked. Maybe it's the culture of the difference between chiros and therapists. So here in the States, it's very, so this will crack you up. Like, so I got the DPT in 2008. And prior to that, the degree had existed for maybe 10 years. And it was a big deal when therapists got the doctorate option, because the chiros had fought it so long for that PTs couldn't be calling themselves doctors.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And so there was this kind of like legal grudge match on who gets to be a rehab doctor. Is it the chiros or the therapist? And now we both get to. But the funny thing is we're doing the same grudge match over manipulations, which are like, Rob, the techniques where, you know, you move a body and it goes crack, or you get told it gets realigned. So a lot of physios are trained with those techniques, but here in the States, we can't legally call them manipulations. That's a chiro word. Even though we might use the same technique, we have to call it something else. And it's something silly. It's a grade 5 joint mobilization or a high velocity, low amplitude thrust, which isn't as sexy as a manipulation, you know? So it's just, it's just kind of like, again, it's just one of those things where maybe that whole culture is connected to the layperson going, oh, I trust chiropractors more first for back pain. Or I have people that go, hey, is this, I got this pain. Do you think this is a chiropractor thing I should go take care of? Or like, should I get, and I'm like, what does that mean? I don't know what that means.
Yeah. I think as time goes on and, what I can see anyway in Australia, and it looks like across the board, is kind of like a merging, a blending of totally. All of the health professions. And really, I think it just comes down to the clinician, really, for me. Like, most of what I'm doing and what I've kind of been studying over the last 6 years is almost to the side of, what was taught at uni for physio and that sort of thing. And then I see some of my friends who are osteo trained or chiro trained and, moving away from kind of just the bone cracking and manipulations and into some exercise prescription and kind of treating the whole thing as well. So I think there is like this kind of blending of the different professions, which, on the whole is kind of a good thing. But so really for the people, I think you got to choose the person. You got to choose the clinician that you want to see that has the experience of having results in helping, someone with the similar presentation to yourself. An example is I had a friend, she messaged me just yesterday and she's like, oh, I can't sit for more than 5 minutes. My back's just killing. I've already seen physio and I've already seen physio and seen chiro. What should I do? Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, well, it depends. It depends on, I don't know who the physio is, what they did, the chiro, who they are, what they did. So sometimes people think, that physiotherapy is a treatment modality or chiro is a treatment modality. Right. And that when really it's a whole, interaction between two people, and all those parts are individual to the clinician you see and their background and their experience. So I think you've got to choose the person you want to see. And then the profession is their background. I called my business Sapien Rehab and Performance, and kind of shied away from including physiotherapy in the name, because I just feel like that is boxing me into a kind of a set way of thinking and treating, when really what I'm doing is rehab and performance. I'm trying to help people at both ends of the spectrum there. And my training is a physiotherapist, but it's not necessarily the thing that I do.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, no, I love the way you look at that, man. And it kind of has me thinking like, yeah, it sounds sexy, and it probably makes a lot of sense. I think, like yourself, it's like you learn a basic toolkit in school, and then it's kind of up to the individual practitioner to kind of do something with it. Like, do you want to continue doing stuff from 1996, or do you want to like kind of keep up and try things and see how it goes? And I think that's probably a personality thing. But yeah, just to kind of piggyback to what Scott was saying, I think having a patient or a person choose a provider that they trust for sure is key. And what I usually tell people, I get this a lot because, I've worked almost 15 years here in our county developing a certain reputation. So, I really don't take it for granted. So I got a lot of surfers and friends of surfer friends of surfers that will contact me out of the blue. Hey, so and so gave me your number. I got this shoulder thing, and so it's like I have that trust, and maybe because I treat surfers, people put more trust in me if they're dealing with a surfing issue. But like this is a common experience that I get, which is a bit unfortunate that I try to coach people on. People go, hey, I've done physio for whatever, my shoulder or my back, and it didn't work, and I want to see you now. And I go, well, how it didn't work? What do you mean? And they go, well, I did this. Well, what did you do? Tell me about it. And pretty much I just try to see where they're at. And what I tell a lot of these people is like, look, if you've had shoulder pain for 12 plus weeks without an injury, you're kind of on a bumpy path just right out of the gate. You're going to go up and down. Have a dialogue with that provider, because I'm not going to get you better in 1 or 2 sessions. But what's probably going to work is developing a relationship with a person and letting them know what works, what doesn't work. Hey, that thing you did last time, change this. Like, how are we defining improvement? Do you know? Do you have an expectation on your prognosis? Do you have a time frame for how long you think this is going to get better? And so just basic things like that, right? Like, because I feel like so often around here, people do 1 or 2 visits and then boom, I'm off to the next modality, and it's like, give it some time, give the feedback, even if it's tough feedback, like, hey, all that hour-long session of back rubbing, like, it did not help. And this is how I know it. I still had 30 minutes of morning stiffness on average. It still hurts at X degrees when I bend. I can still only sit for 5 minutes. Nothing's changing. If I heard that as a physio, I'd be like, great feedback. Let's do something else. Or like, let's mix it up. But, sometimes just defining that right out of the gate is key. Because you probably know this, but like it took me a decade to figure it out. Like, people's expectations, especially with persistent pain, are oftentimes malaligned with the time frame of the physiology. So some of it's probably natural history, right? Like the minute someone thinks they're doing something better for themselves, they're probably going to start getting better with a little bit of time. So that's kind of like nothing that we can do about, But like, I'm personally really interested in the variables that we introduce into your pain equation and what that does on the opposite end of the formula, and how are we tracking that? Is it just a subjective pain sense, or what feedback are you providing that what I did here changed you, because that's when I want to layer in more complexity, different systems, different body areas, adjacent regions, things like that.
Yeah, I think like you say, it helps to define what we're using as measures of progress. We could see someone like, let's say someone's got a sore shoulder, it's a good one with paddling, and 1 week they can only lift their arm to here with X amount of pain. The next week they might say, oh, that shoulder's still no good. Mm-hmm. And then you'll check the actual the data, the objective measures. Okay, well now you can move it to here with less pain than you could move it to here. So for me, that's a huge result.
Right.
To the person who's just wanting the pain gone, well, their issue is still there. But yeah, I think it's definitely like the therapist's job to set those expectations and to communicate like pretty directly and pretty honestly with how long things should take. And like you say, we've got to have that kind of open feedback between the kind of client and the therapist. Sometimes people get a bit maybe scared to tell us, they'll be like, oh, I think it's a little bit better, or
right.
I'd rather just tell me, is it working or not, because we can change the plan if it's not. So
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
it helps as well. I think I've kind of carved out, like yourself, a bit of a niche, which I think is a nice way to treat, because you really start to see the patterns in those populations and can get some good results. And when it comes to surfing, I just think anyone that surfs, generally they want to see someone else that surfs, and once they do, you have that common language and common understanding of what it is they need to do and why they want to get back to what they do. Whereas, someone that might not surf would just take a couple of months out of the water, or not really understand the implications of being a surfer.
Yeah.
So I think having that niche helps, because there's a specific knowledge that comes from doing something. I've taken a lot from Rob's paddling course that we did on the Gold Coast, and all his YouTube and all those things. They all add up to kind of create the result.
Yeah, you guys have been talking a lot about the rehab side of it. And I love how you have it's Sapien Rehab and performance. So on the performance side, do you guys see those same barriers to break through with somebody, to really communicate with somebody, that you do on the rehab side? Because on the rehab side, they might say, "Oh yeah, it's not better. My shoulder's not better yet." But with the performance side, it's I feel that the elements of improvement, the measurements are much smaller in nature, but they're more open to small progressions towards improving. So do you see a difference between the rehab and the performance? Like when you're working with someone in rehab versus really performant, we want to improve your performance by doing these dryland exercises or by doing these mobility exercises.
Yeah, I think depending on the kind of who you're working with, but yeah, you find a lot of fairly elite athletes in whatever kind of realm. They're always pretty sensitive to their body, and people kind of know when they're getting a improvement in something. So same thing, I think those subtle improvements in someone that's finely tuned. Let's think of performance as like the kind of Formula One. They're going to be receptive to small changes in their movement, or how the breathing pattern might affect their recovery between a paddle out, or little things like that. So yeah, I think it probably does come down to that kind of communication as well. As well as same thing, still taking objective measures. We want to take some I like to use a lot of video with coaching as well. So doing some kind of video comparisons of exercises and things like that, as well as the objective measures of kind of basic range of movement, strength, all those sorts of testing, even more like along the lines of the kind of strength and conditioning testing. We'll do some pre and at the end of this program, we'll do some post testing, that sort of thing. So yeah, same thing, depends on the athlete and the person. A couple of the guys I am working with, and Rod does the same. We've just started using some like DEXA scans and things like that to measure the effectiveness of a training program on body composition and kind of lean muscle gain and things like that, if it's the purpose of the program. So yeah, having those tangible aspects for performance, I think, is kind of as relevant as the rehab. It's just a sliding scale. We got the rehab and then the performance, and it's just a continuum of the same thing at either end.
Yeah. I love this one post that you did on Instagram. It was, speaking of objective measurements, you said to do this exercise, and you said something foul about the number of repetitions you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And I absolutely loved it. You're like counting reps are for wussies, and
Yeah.
and I absolutely love that. But that's one of those things where you're still objective in that, how many can I do without it burning too much, or that sort of thing. And Jim's giving me these exercises for my foot. He's like, yeah, do as many until you're done with it, So is that a general philosophy for that one exercise, or do you kind of take that approach to strength training? You're like, yeah, just burn it out every time.
Yeah, so I was just going to say it depends, but
we're used to that answer here, Scott.
Yeah, so kind of same thing, like context specific, but yeah, like it really depends on the goal of the exercise. So let's say the goal might be something that's more neuromuscular. You know, we're trying to ingrain a new neural pathway, as an example, and a lot of the some of the DNS work and things is kind of geared at that neuroplasticity and changing the nervous system. So in that sense, you know, not going to have much load. There's not going to be the implications at the kind of recovery level for tissue. So in that sense, yeah, people can do quite a lot of reps. And then on the other end, if we were doing a back squat, you know, I've just programmed in to a guy's program, we're doing 5x5 back squats with a 3-minute rest. So it depends on the muscle and the goal of the exercise, why you're doing it. And I think that would be the same for some of your stuff, Rob. I think, you know, we've got a lot of your exercises where we're working on the motor patterning. You know, I really love the catch-up drill. I always, most surfs kind of touch on that. And the one where we just kind of hold the hands in the water so that you're kind of catching one up and then kind of paddle and then glide, enter and glide. So yeah, on that neuromuscular level, I think lots of repetitions of a high quality is good. And then if we're going for kind of maximal strength output or power output, then we have to be pretty specific to get that adaptation from the body.
Yeah, I read back when Lance Armstrong was top of his game before we knew how he was doing it. When he got cancer, I read in his book, you know, he lost all this weight. And then he became a better cyclist afterwards because he lost all this upper body weight. And so when he built himself back up, he basically just loaded up his legs and really focused on sport-specific body characteristics that would give him an advantage. So do either of you guys believe that for surfers, there are certain body characteristics that are going to give you an advantage?
You can start there, Jim. That's a good question.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I think probably, you know, but there's been so many successful surfers with all sorts of different body types, right? Like, look at Owen Wright. Like,
I was going to say Owen Wright.
Owen Wright's, what is he, an ectomorph? It's been so long since I've classified body types, but essentially he's thin, tall, lean, and then you got kind of like a Kelly Slater, who's maybe a mesomorph, you might call him. He's like 5'8", 5'9", 160, 165. And then you got even stockier guys like a Felipe Toledo or Adriano or something like that, you know. So, and all those guys are so skilled, you know, but it'd be interesting to see, like, you know, some of that, like, anthropometric work, like, you know, what's the WSL average height and weight in the men's? What's the average height and weight in female? I don't know. I don't really know the exact answer to that, but I would take a stab and say certain body types probably lend themselves easier to certain sports, which might be why basketball players are tall, right? It might be why football players are broad. It might be why surfers are average with low centers of gravity, you know. And then for those anomalies like the Philippes or the Owen Wrights, maybe they had to train a little harder, or I don't know. Yeah, I think that's the best.
Scott, what do you think?
That.
Yeah, like Jim's saying, you look at even at the top level, and there's such a huge variance in body types and even training philosophies. You know, I saw a video the other day on social media. I think it was Italo, and he was doing some heavy deadlifts. You know, 110, 100.
Yeah,
heaving some pretty good movement, but going pretty ham on some deadlifts. And then on the other end, you might have a surfer that has never done any weights, weight training. They've just done yoga, you know, and they can also get to that kind of peak level. So surfing is an interesting one because there is so many different takes on it. And I think it's unique. I just really got drawn to training surfers and kind of understanding the sport because of I think there is like an area where it meets in the middle, where there's a combination of kind of mobility, stability, strength, endurance, power, and the best athletes seem to, for their body, be able to combine those elements of the different athletic traits and be able to combine them specific to their body type and use that in their maneuvers. So someone like Owen Wright, like you say, typically a tall surfer like that kind of looks tall. They kind of look a bit gangly and look a bit tall, whereas you just see Owen's movement and his connection with his body and his timing is so good, and kind of similar to Geordie as well. Like they don't really, they don't look they don't look like that body type because they're just so aware of their body and using it to their advantage in that sport. So yeah, it's funny because I think the body type sort of dictates the style of surfing that kind of individual goes after. So yeah, surfing's a weird one. There's really not a defined exact type. There's lots of different types, and yeah, it's interesting. Same as Jim, I don't think there's too much of a concrete answer there.
Yeah, that question comes from some biomechanics that I've studied on for swimming. And with swimming, there are many studies discussing the advantages of long arms, big hands, thin shoulders to cut through the water. There are actual,
like the width.
Yeah, the width of the shoulders. But you have these. If you look at Michael Phelps, that's why part of the reason why he's so good. If you go beyond all the technique, if you go beyond all the conditioning, and you just look at physical attributes, tall, lanky guys like Owen Wright would be fantastic swimmers, for the sheer fact that if everything else is the same and it's me versus Michael Phelps, he's going to beat me every time because just pure surface area of his arm length of his paddle. It's like giving somebody on a SUP the same exact SUP board, but one paddle has double the surface area of another, and everything else is the same. And obviously the one with double the surface area is always going to win in that situation. So with surfing, you're right. It's because there are so many different advanced movements. You need to be mobile. You need to be strong in certain areas. You need to have quick responses, fast twitch muscles. I find it so fascinating to talk to you guys about that because I know you've gone through basically a body transformation since you've surfed, right, Scott? And you used to be a big weightlifter, right?
He had a before and after pic on his Insta. I was like, dude, is that the same guy? You were like twice the size a few years ago.
Yeah, he was like, I pick things up and put them down, before, but now he's like, I'm a surfer. It's almost like you've molded your body to fit with the sport or the activity that you're trying to achieve performance at.
Yeah, I think that's where kind of having not growing up with surfing has probably helped because I have a kind of outside lens on what it looks like, and you can't really take the skill set for granted. Whereas if you grew up as a kid surfing, a lot of things will be pretty intuitive, and you'll see the guys that have kind of grown up surfing, and even a lot of on the Gold Coast. There's so many amazing, young surfers. And a lot of it isn't coached and a lot of it's just intuitive. And then for me, I grew up playing rugby. So I played some decent level rugby union, which you guys would kind of know as the sort of form of rugby where everyone just kind of piles on top of each other. And so I grew up playing rugby and as part of that sport needed to kind of get bigger. And so when I was sort of 17, 18, I was around 70 kilos. And then by the time I was 26, I was around that photo I posted on social media. I I was about 95 kilos at that point. So over that time, I'd just been, kind of freakishly consistent with training and nutrition, and tried lots of different styles of training through bodybuilding, powerlifting, and then kind of got to this point where I'd put on, 25 kilos of muscle. I'd done a lot of sport and athletic type stuff growing up, and then just kind of got big and really lost most of the kind of physical traits that I'd kind of had at other points in my life. And then that led to a back injury. Basically, I had a pretty nasty herniated disc, which really put me down a different path. I would go to the gym and do what I was doing before, and it would aggravate my back. I would go surf and kind of just, more free movement, and it would feel better. So then I just sort of started getting kind of pulled more towards that and away from the things that were making my back feel worse. And then, that sort of got me completely hooked. And then now my training is more geared at the sport, at the sport of surfing. So I try to kind of understand the demands on the different parts of the body for the sport, and then create the body to match that, basically. But it's still a process, I'm still working through a lot of things. Like training in that way that I did is specific for that purpose, but it comes at a bit of a cost, So it's a lot of unwinding a lot of those restrictions and muscle imbalances and things that come as a result of that style of training, as well as the injuries that I've sort of had as well. Long process, and definitely feel a lot better. I think right now I'm about 75, 76 kilos, and that feels like it's a good combination where I can still do some good strength work, but kind of get my body into lots of different positions as well.
Is that weight with or without the beard?
And that would be current bearded weight, 70.
Okay,
76.
just checking. Yeah. Well, surfing's like, it's more intrinsic, right? So like Rob knows this answer. Rob, how fast do you have to paddle to catch into a wave?
As fast as the wave is moving.
Right. So you're propelling yourself, right? You're doing that to yourself. So that might explain why guys that surf Mavericks can be like a Grant Washburn who's like 6'5", 240 pounds. Or you can have like an Alex Martins that's like 5'6" or 7", 140 pounds. They're both propelling their own body to go a certain amount of speed. So they're doing something intrinsic to catch up to a moving thing, a wave, right? So that might explain the variation. Whereas like a sport like baseball, maybe the body types look fairly similar because they're trying to insert something extrinsically. They're trying to hit the ball 400 feet over a fence, right? So there's probably a certain amount of mass that you need to accrue to be able to generate the force to hit a ball that far, right? So it's kind of like, it's pretty interesting to think about, but I think that was a long...
No, that's actually I think that's a really good analogy, because when you go back to the Mavericks wave, Mavericks waves are moving at about 30 miles an hour into the beach, and there's no way you can paddle that fast. You can't even paddle as fast as a 2-foot wave moving 6.2 miles an hour. So you're actually looking to tap into gravity and the momentum of that energy and have that energy transfer into you, and then you go down it. So as opposed to swinging a bat, that is very, objective measurement of how big you need to be and how much torque you need to emit in order to get that ball over the fence.
But it's all relative, right?
It's all relative,
Your body is a certain height and weight, and your muscles are certain bulks, and you have a certain amount of strength. And, if your relative ratios are a little bit more than the guy who's 100 pounds heavier than you, you still might be able to generate more torque and speed when you need it, even though that speed differential might be next to nil, right? And maybe even the speed, like you said, isn't even the key ingredient that catches the wave, but it's more your intrinsic awareness or the way you read waves, right? Whereas certain sports, like I can't dunk a basketball, there's no amount of training I'm going to do. Maybe, but probably
Dude,
not.
I've seen online you can dunk. There's a dunk like course online.
Yeah, well, maybe if you have Dr. Scott's physique, you could get there. But there's no way I'm going to get to be able to dunk a basketball with like a certain amount of training. If I do all the training in the world, is my point.
Right.
And but yet I could probably out paddle a guy twice my size potentially, even though he's got more mass than me or can jump higher. So yeah, interesting question.
It's a good thought. It's a good thought process. It's basically, for me, I'll associate it to paddling. It's almost as if you could get bigger shoulders or work your upper body a lot more, is it going to incrementally increase your paddling speed? And right now it's no, very, very small increments. Mm-hmm. But you're always going to hit a maximum hole speed in flat water. So you're always going to hit that brick wall, no matter how big or small you are. But if that hole speed was gone, let's say that, the more you work out, the more you work on strength, you can get up to speeds that jet skis move just by using your arms. Mm-hmm. Now that world of catching that 40-foot wave is totally different. Mm-hmm. And your possibilities are open. But because we have that limitation in flat water associated to paddling, there's an issue there. I almost think if there's that barrier while riding a wave and moving that quickly, and I'm not versed enough in that big a wave riding to understand that whole concept, but you look at guys like Kai Lenny and those guys that are doing these carves on 40-foot waves now, and the amount of torque and tension that's on their body through that movement going that fast, because they're going well past 30, 35 miles an hour when they're going through that turn. Mm-hmm. And the amount of load that is on their body at that point would be remarkable to measure, I think. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How would you guys train someone to do something like that?
I would just go on Scott's Instagram and start cherry picking all those cool exercises. Yeah, I don't know. I think Scott and I are a bit different because he probably sees a bit more performance stuff. Whereas I work with a big managed care 30 hours a week kind of outfit where it's my job is to get people out of pain and to accomplish functional goals, not to perform better surfing, right? I do have that private practice where I do cash, but even those people are usually paying me money because they're in a bit of a hole with pain. And so my skill set's probably more versed at complex problem solving of persistent pain than it is taking it to that next level, although I have done that. But I would imagine you got to have some foundational movements in that program. Kind of like Scott said, depending on what muscle and what your intent is with the training. Someone like Kai Lenny doing those kind of maneuvers with the torque going through the lumbar pelvic hip complex, you got to imagine that opens up the probability for problems there, tendinopathies or issues around the hip. So we're talking the classic kind of sports hernia type things, and SI joint, low back issues. So what can we do to train and prevent that? Well, we can do anti-rotation type of training to withstand that. We can promote stability there. We can do complex lifts and loads, building, progressing with the load over time. So there's a lot of cool stuff that I think you can do, and it'd be fun to work with someone like Kai Lenny with those kind of pursuits and goals. And I would only imagine if he were a physio of someone like Kai Lenny, he'd probably bring some interesting things to the table at some point in time that are pretty unique to that sport, who was it? Jamie Mitchell. What was it? A few years ago, he got crunched by a big wave. It might have been down in Mexico, but he broke his... Was that Puerto? He broke his sternum. So, yeah, I don't know about you, Scott. I've been practicing 13 plus years. I've never seen a sternum fracture. You know, like I would know how to rehab it,
we
but
see a few, yeah, like with the, I guess, rugby league, you know, we got the kind of football
okay.
codes here. So I've done some work with a couple of like rugby league football teams. So because
Yeah.
they're, you know, our football over here, there's kind of no helmets, no padding or anything
Yeah, it
like that. So
sounds like an Aussie thing.
yeah, exactly.
Only
So
Aussies
there's
break
some,
their sternums.
yeah, seen a couple, but yeah, more, you know, like kind of rib cartilage injuries
Yeah.
and kind of rib fractures and those sorts of things. But in terms of rehabilitation, you're fairly limited in what you can do with those sorts of things. It really just needs to kind of heal, and you can try and work in with that, but there's only so much kind of a push along you can give for those sorts of injuries.
So Scott, what do you think? Would you have any idea of if Kyle Lenny came to you and said, "Hey, listen, I gotta be prepared to make a 40-mile-an-hour cutback on a 50-foot wave"? What sort of training regimen would you give him, or would you need to really understand that movement better?
It's such a hard one because it's kind of like you know, you're almost preparing for something that you almost can't prepare for. You know, there's no like comparison in terms of what you can do with the physical side of the training, I think. But yeah, I could probably put it down to, you know, I've got a guy who's basically an everyday surfer. You know, he's a local in around where I live, and he reached out to me because he has a goal. He wants to Jason. He wants to surf a 20-foot wave. So he's a kind of lifetime surfer, couple of kids,
Oh,
and
is
just
that the Big Wave Challenge guy, Jason?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Jason
okay.
Purton. Yep,
I
Yeah,
I think
saw
I've
that.
seen him.
That's cool.
Yeah, I think I pushed him on to some of your stuff as well.
yeah.
Uh, and that's the sort of guy where, you know, he's never surfed a 20-foot wave. We don't understand what that's going to kind of feel like for him at that moment in time. So it's not even just the physical. You know, the physical preparation is part of it. You know, you've got to have the capacity to be able to paddle to get onto the wave if you're going to paddle it. You've got to have the balance and stability to do that in that moment with lots of other things going on. You want to also have probably the peace of mind that if you do wipe out, that you can hold your breath for, you know, a good 1 to 2 wave hold down. So in that sense, there's like, you'd break that training up into a bunch of different areas.
Yeah.
So I know Jason, he's done some sessions with was kind of, we were putting together a bit of a training program where he was doing some pool sessions on breath holding with Nam Baldwin, who's on the Gold Coast.
Yep.
We were just doing some pretty general like strength and conditioning work. He's doing some work on recovery, and then I think the other parts is probably looking into some sorts of visualization and some sorts of other kind of more mental tools that you can try and have that experience when you've never had it before. Another really good guy I've spoke to along these lines, because I find it interesting, people doing, you know, kind of crazy things when you don't know the certainty of the outcome. And one of my friends, a guy, Ollie Dowsett, you guys might have seen him. He's a amputee, so he kind of lost his leg in a road traffic accident in Bali, and just last year he surfed some huge waves at Nazaré in Portugal, and talked to him about that. You know, like, he'd never even surfed a wave that size with 2 legs. So how do you know that you can surf it with an artificial leg? And you know, like, I like to use those kind of guys more than my own experience, because I don't have that experience. But yeah, Ollie's sort of, you know, lots of mental rehearsal and lots of visualization. Yeah. So by the time you're at that point in time, you've already done it. You know, you already surfed that wave 1,000 times. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's really a matter of preparation. The physical is one part, the mental is one part, and then the safety is going to be the other part. So someone like Kyle Lenny, you know, he's thrown himself into such crazy positions with all those different crafts, you know, which is probably what allows him to do what he's doing on a surfboard. the fact he's actually done it on the kite surf, or he's done it on the windsurfer, he's done it on all these other things, which is probably what's opening him up to doing things that no one else can do. Because he's already put himself into different positions on kind of waves of that caliber, and so he's almost got a bit of a training effect through exposure.
Yeah.
So that's the hard thing. How do you prepare yourself for something you've never done? You know, I'm hoping to myself surf some kind of big-ish waves. You know, nothing of that size, but you know, kind of 8 to 10 foot tubes in Mentawais is something I've been kind of like preparing myself for the last few years. And you know, I've got as the background on my phone, I've got a picture of Bruno Santos, who's a goofy footer. I spent some time with him in the Mentawais a couple of years ago, and I just got this photo of him just super chilled in a, you know, well overhead barrel at Kandui, and that's been the background on my phone for the last 2 years, and I'm going to keep it there till I've got a similar kind of photo myself.
That's cool.
So they're the sorts of things I think is possible. You know, you are kind of mentally preparing for that reality before you've had it.
Yeah.
And that kind of helps to you know, probably push you over the ledge when the time comes.
Yeah.
You've already done it before. Yeah.
Hey Scott, thanks for your time, man. I don't want to take up too much of your time, but if somebody wanted to get a hold of you on the Gold Coast or even just globally, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, cool, man. So a couple of avenues. So I've got my personal social media page, which is called the Surf Physio, _surf_physio. On that page, I probably post, let's say, more relevant things for surfers. Some mindset stuff, some specific exercises, some other bits and pieces that I do. And then otherwise, my business would be the other connection for kind of treatment locally, as well as I do some telehealth work and that sort of thing as well. So my business page would be Sapien Rehab and Performance. So both of them on kind of Instagram or Facebook.
Cool, man. Appreciate it. We'll have to do this again. Yeah, I got a lot more questions, but we got to go because once again, my son's trumpet lessons are ending or are about to begin, and we don't want that in our background.
Okay,
that's
well,
good timing for me, man.
Hey, Scott, I got a physio joke for you.
Yep, let's do it.
What human body part is long, hard, bendable, resilient, and contains the letters PENSI?
Penis, spine.
Fine.
Penis spine. I love it.
Okay.
Good way to end
Hey,
it.
Scott, thanks a lot for talking
Awesome.
with us, man. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was fun, man. Hopefully,
Yeah.
hopefully some people got something out of it. But yeah, it was good to catch up, Rob and Jim.